All right, so it is Friday. We are ready to go, and we are working our way through the knee joint today. So we're going to take a look at some of our common injuries first, then we'll start getting into sort of what our ideal posture is supposed to look like. We're going to talk about like Q angle and stuff, and then we're going to see a little bit of a larger list of muscles today. Not that bad, not too many, but definitely a little bit larger than what we saw yesterday in the ankle. The ankle, just a couple of them. So it's a little bit different. But taking a look at this, if we're talking about our knee joint, we know that the knee is kind of trapped between two very strong areas. It's trapped between your hip, which is obviously has the biggest and strongest muscle in your body with the glute, but it's also trapped between your ankle, which is then pinned to the floor. So, there's not a lot, a lot of how your ankle sits is going to affect how your knee moves. A lot of how your hips fire is going to affect how your knee moves. So it's greatly sort of, we see it's greatly influenced by the joints, below and above it. So we're definitely going to need to pay attention. A lot of our conversation today is going to kind of circle back to what we talked about in the ankle, and and then it's also going to sort of allude to what we're going to talk about on Monday in the hip. So but the knee joint's really cool. It's actually the largest joint in your body in terms of like how much space there is, not in terms of like the space itself, but just surface to surface contact. Biggest joint in your body. It's pretty complex, and then it's primarily going to act as a hinge joint. So most of what it does is this hinging action, but one of the cool things we're going to see is it does have a little bit of rotational movement after we get a certain angle of bend, and that's, to me, one of the coolest things about the knee. So talking about injuries here, we know there's about 80 to 100,000 ACL in particular injuries in the US every year. And so like you see, that's a pretty large number of ACL injuries. And you're thinking, you might be thinking, it's like, man, I didn't know that many people are playing football or basketball or playing sports and stuff. And here's the thing, honestly, most people are not. About 70% of those injuries are non-contact, which whenever I hear the term non-contact, I always think, it's an avoidable injury. Like it kind of shouldn't have happened, because like non-contact to me kind of just says, somebody was moving and, there was a little bit of inefficient movement there. Something got overstressed and it got injured, right? Whereas like, yeah, if somebody like smacks you in the knee, you're not really going to, no matter how good a shape you're in, if it's going to tear, it's going to tear, that's not really a side effect of your posture or, how you sort of generally move. But like a non-contact injury kind of is, like it really shouldn't have, it kind of comes out of nowhere, it happened due to like poor habits and stuff. So most ACL injuries, usually between the ages of 15 and 25, because again, we see a lot of sports taking place there, and also just those non-contact injuries. So it's kind of a perfect meeting ground for that. But one of the things that we know about ACL injuries in particular is that if we can enhance our neuromuscular control, if we can learn how to like stabilize the body effectively, it will often reduce our risk of these non-contact injuries, which is why, whenever I'm telling my friends or family or anything, I get a lot of questions and I'm sure you guys get this as well, even just, studying personal training. I get a lot of questions where people are like, hey, I get this ache or I get this pain. What can I do? Or it's like, all right, I got this injury. Like, how do I come back from that injury? And honestly, like the number one piece of advice that I give people, because obviously like I need time to be able to like break down their posture. I need to be able to like actually look at them, right? But if I got a client who has like, or I got a friend who's just like looking for general advice, I always ask them like, hey, do you work out? And they're like, yeah. And I'm like, well, from now on, whatever exercise you're doing in the gym, or whatever exercise you're doing at home, if it's possible for you to do it on one leg, do it on one leg. That's the number one piece of advice I give people. You're doing bicep curls, give me some single leg bicep curls. You're doing tricep extensions, give me some single leg tricep extensions, right? Shoulder press, give me a single leg shoulder press. That is my number one go-to advice. And I think that like it's honestly like the best advice that you can give somebody, because it is going to enhance their stabilization. It's going to work all those little micro muscles. They're still going to get to work on all the strength stuff they wanted to. They're going to burn a couple extra calories because they're working harder to, you know, stabilize their core and stuff. But they're just enhancing proprioception. Right, they're getting a little bit more of that like information coming into the body, right? Your body learns how to do things in this position, in this position, in this position, in this position, that one, and that. You know, like all of those little tiny changes make a really positive impact. So we're going to see a lot. We're going to talk a lot about stability today when we are talking about the knee, because again, being the largest joint in your body means that like we definitely want it to be very stable. So just before we dive in, just so we can make sense of some of this anatomy here, if you're looking at your knee, you're going to see a couple specialized structures here. One of the coolest things in your knee actually is that it's got menisci. it's got two meniscuses, and it's got your patella, which is your actual kneecap. So taking a look here, you can see there's the femur, right? This is the largest bone in your body right here. It comes down. It's got these two condyles on the end of it. And then there's your tibia. That's where it sits. But like your tibia really wouldn't, you know, your patella needs to sit on top of your tibia, and we need it to not slide out, or, you know, we need it to not slide anywhere, right? We need it to stay on top of the tibia. So that's actually where your menisci come in. You've got a lateral meniscus and a medial meniscus. And what they do is, this picture doesn't really show it very well. I think you can kind of see it a little bit better here, but basically it makes it sort of a little half pipe shape, you know? It basically kind of sits inwards like this, which keeps your knee from sliding out over either side. And so they're these kind of C-shaped little pieces of connective tissue that live on top of your tibia. And so they're there to deepen this indentation on top of the knee, on top of the tibia there. And so that keeps your femur from kind of sliding out. But with all that space, we definitely need to have some ligaments there that are going to be really strong to, you know, be able to work against like our quadriceps and our hamstrings, but also be able to stabilize the entire knee. And so that's where you've got like your two cruciate ligaments in the middle. You've got the one in front, that's your ACL, that's that anterior cruciate ligament. That's the one, like I mentioned, that we often see a lot of injuries in. You get your PCL, that's your posterior cruciate ligament, it's in the back. You've got your MCL, that's your medial collateral ligament. And you've got your LCL, that's your lateral collateral ligament. And then on top of all that, we've got our patella, right? So I'm going to try and, you know, kind of show you this. We're going to build a knee, right? You know, and again, I'm not the greatest artist, so we're just going to kind of start with a little dog bone here, right? And that's your femur, you know, it kind of looks just like that. And so then we've got our tibia, which kind of comes up and it makes this little platform here and kind of goes across. And then comes down kind of like this. And then you get your fibula on the side that kind of circles down, and then it kind of lives like that. And so if we're trying to create stability here, right, we want to have our meniscus, we want it to be kind of thick on the outside and get a little bit thinner on the inside. God dang it. A little bit thinner on the inside there. And so there's our meniscus, right? And then we'll put the other one up, right? So it's a little thick on the outside, right? And if we look from the top, like I said, it's kind of that C shape. And now we need an anterior cruciate ligament and a posterior cruciate ligament. So we're going to put our anterior cruciate ligament. It's going to start here. It's going to be on the front, and it's going to run across like this. It's going to create some stability going from one side to the other. It'll actually be on top of that meniscus there. And then your posterior cruciate ligament would be in the back, right? And so it's going to go this way and kind of circle behind, right? And then you're going to have your LCL, that's your lateral collateral ligament on the outside, lateral, creating stability there, right? And then we're going to have our MCL, that's the medial collateral ligament on the inside, creating stability there. And there's our four, that's, you know, there's all that structure. And then we've got our patella just kind of living on top here, right? It's this kind of, you know, shaped bone, kind of like this. we'll not fill that in because it'll kind of cover everything up. So obviously we're going to have all of our muscles attached to that patella. You know, we're going to have all of our quadricep muscles kind of coming down. You know, we'll have one coming from this angle and running up. We'll have one coming down in the center here and then running up, and then we're going to have another one coming from this angle. And then we're going to see over top of all of them one big quadricep muscle that kind of honestly like loops around the whole thing. And there's your quads, right? So the muscles gets a little bit more complicated. We'll get into that in just a little bit. You can kind of see that here. We're seeing 3 of the quadricep muscles here. We're actually, or I guess arguably we're seeing all 4 of them, but one of them is definitely hidden by the big one over top. So those are all the structures there to kind of give us stability. Now we are going to see some damage sometimes, or you know, some injuries sometimes, particularly in the meniscus, right? So we got a meniscus tear here. This is where either of your meniscuses are experiencing some type of tear like this, or maybe like a bucket handle tear like that, where it gets like a tear in the whole thing, and it kind of just separates. The outer ridge stays put, but then it kind of just tears inwards. This often occurs during like what we call like a shear force. So like a shear force is when you get like a lot of pressure coming down and like a twisting action simultaneously. So if you have like, you know, I'm sure you guys have heard in like a group exercise class, or you know, during just like maybe a training session, you'll hear people say like, hey, make sure that when you're landing soft, you know, like soft meaning like, hey, reduce your impact, use your muscles, like land quietly. What I always like to tell people is I'm like, hey, land like a ninja, you know, like I want you to make like an assassin's landing, like on your squat jumps, because like we're trying to reduce the amount of impact, right? We don't want to land really hard and kind of smack our, you know, that brings your femur and your tibia together, because this is, you know, eventually trapped from the floor, and then all your body weight's coming down this way, right? And if you do that while you're twisting at the same time, it can create this sort of shear action and tear that meniscus. So we don't really want to see that. Again, lack of stability comes with lack of stability kind of comes a lack of proper movement, and that ends up resulting in that injury. Next one we're going to see, like I said, is that ACL tear. That's that anterior cruciate ligament tear. You know, this ACL, that's the one living in the front. Probably one of the most common sports related injuries that are out there. And like I said, is often very non-contact. This usually happens during like a really hard plant and cut situation. So you might be making like a fake to one side, planting really hard, and then trying to cut the other way. That is actually like my favorite move when I'm playing sports. But like if you're making like a really hard here and then you go this way, right, you'll notice like what happens with my knee, right? If I plant really hard, I turn in like this as I'm pressing away, right? So even now, like, I felt like a little bit of awkwardness in my knee just doing that extension from this awkward angle here, right? And so, again, without that stability in the knee and without mobility in the knee, you know, this is going to be a very common injury. And oftentimes, you know, the reason it occurs during a planting situation is because, you know, you look at like how you are sort of cutting away, like at this angle here, you know, it's tied like this. You're pulling, you know, this bone this way, and you're, you know, this bone this way, and you're often like doing a little bit of a rotation simultaneously. So it's just overstretching that ligament, you know, resulting in that tear. Next one we're going to see that's very common is going to be your MCL tear. I actually tore this in high school myself. So the medial collateral ligament is stretching or tearing of the medial ligament. That's the inside portion here. Okay. So why is this one more common? You know, like we see, look at our LCL ligaments over here, right? Why would it be much easier to sort of tear this than it would be to tear this? You know, well, this is typically like a contact injury, right? And so what ends up happening is like you end up overstretching the knee, usually because somebody is going to like, you know, tackle you or something like that. Usually this is like a collision sports injury, right? This is oftentimes where somebody will sort of like smack the knee, and it will literally just sort of, you know, this is the side, right? So it's here. So if you smack the knee that way while it's sort of in a locked position, maybe somebody tackles you going this way, right? And now you overstretch that ligament, that's going to cause that tear. We'll also see a very common or a less very common one. I actually didn't put this in the notes because it's really uncommon, is your PCL ligament. So your PCL ligament, not injured very commonly. You kind of have to do it during like hyperextension of the knee, and your knee doesn't really hyperextend that much. And you also need to be able to have like a little bit of lateral movement. So those two things just don't happen very often. But it's this backwards, behind. We're actually looking at the knee here, right? There's that ACL ligament. PCL's behind it, right? So you'd have to twist while also extending the knee out, which, one of the things that kind of protects you is your kneecap goes into place when your leg is straight. And so twisting action doesn't occur very often. This is really not that often. It usually only happens if you're sort of like hyperextended and tackled in a situation like that. And then the LCL ligament, LCL ligament right here, also very infrequently injured. We don't see that one as common either. Again, that's also just an area that is often, very mobile and very flexed. One of the reasons why this isn't very commonly injured is actually sort of a side effect of our poor posture that we often see, which is kind of funny, but we do see a lot of people who have excessive knees caving in, which is kind of stretching out this ligament all day. Which is kind of helping it be very mobile, keeping it from getting injured. Not saying that we want to do that, not saying that we want to have that poor posture because it causes other problems, but it does sort of lower the statistics in terms of how often this one gets injured. So those are the ligaments. That's the meniscus. Any questions on that anatomy so far, guys?
No.
Well, by the way, John, I didn't say hi to you. How you doing?
Well, pretty good. I'm good. I had a meniscus injury. I got skiing.
Yep, that's a common one, especially. Yeah, you're locked into the skis. Same thing with snowboarders. That's the one thing that snowboarders and skiers get along with. They both get meniscus tears pretty commonly. That's a bummer. All right, so the next one we're going to see is what's called patellar tendinopathy. So remember, whenever we hear the word like tendinitis or apathy, right? An anitis is like inflammation, and apathy is sort of like chronic inflammation. Really not a huge distinction there. But patellar tendinitis or patellar tendinopathy is much more commonly referred to as jumper's knee. This is pain or inflammation below the kneecap. So a lot of times, this is where somebody's feeling like a little bit of pain, like under the kneecap here. Oftentimes they'll have a little bit of ache or pain where they kneel on the ground. Mo was talking about this yesterday, actually. I ran into him at Sochi, and he was talking about how he was trying to PR on his barbell squat. And unfortunately, the bar kind of rolled up his shoulder while he was in the low position. And so he kind of had to he kind of tried to muscle it up for a second, but then he was like, nope. And then he just bailed out. That's why we always use the safety bars. They bailed out, and he was like, yeah, that was really lucky that I didn't get any like major injury. But when he knelt on the ground, he could feel just like a little bit of extra ache there, and it was he's overstretching this tendon here over his kneecap, and so that can cause definitely like some aches and pains and stuff. So when that happens chronically, right, that jumper's knee, right, this is inflammation on the kneecap. It happens a lot of times when we are jumping, right? A lot of impact comes down. If you don't land with like a soft landing, it can cause a lot of like rubbing sensation on the kneecap that causes aches and pains. So we see a lot of inflammation and the patellar tendon down here, just below the kneecap. Your quadriceps muscle, right, of the four quadriceps, quad four, of the four quadriceps muscles, your rectus femoris is really the big one that runs over top of the kneecap there and then inserts down here onto the tibia. And so if that gets really, really tight, what ends up happening is your kneecap starts rubbing, or the patellar tendon starts rubbing, right? And that causes aches and pains. Honestly, it's actually not too bad of a problem to fix. You just need to increase your rectus femoris's mobility. You need to stretch out this muscle here. So for the record, I'm actually not a huge fan of this stretch. You know, I know this is a very common stretch that like a lot of people do in like group exercise classes and things like that. But honestly, so many people have hypermobility in this joint. I don't really do it very often with my clients, right? If they're doing this, you know, it's not really stretching their hip flexors very effectively. If I'm going to stretch out a hip flexor, I'm probably much more going to do like a kneeling hip flexor stretch, you know, like this, right? Which is still going to stretch out that same muscle, but it's going to do it in a much more effective way where it's getting the entire thing. This version here really tends to only focus on the quadricep at the very, you know, end down here. Now, that being said, if I had a client with jumper's knee, I completely changed my mind. I think this is a great stretch for someone with jumper's knee, you know, but even better than that, I need a little bit of padding here. Even better than that is going to be like a combination of the two. So if I got a client with jumper's knee, I'm going to go here so I can get their hip flexor. And then I'm also going to go here. I'm also going to go here so I can get their quadriceps simultaneously. And this is probably the best stretch out there for someone with jumper's knee. So for any of you who have a little bit of that pain below the patella, fair warning, you do want a lot of padding. Even that pillow was probably not enough. This is one of the reasons why I told you guys last mod, and some of you will remember this. Every trainer in here should buy one of these. An AirX pad. They are 20 bucks. Yeah, there we go. 15 bucks on Amazon. They can be used to enhance your balance training. And they are just these nice soft pads. They can kneel, that you can put your knee on while you're doing like hip flexor stretches. Best investment ever. That's the first piece of equipment that I replaced after my car got stolen. So yeah, so that is jumper's knee. Like I said, it's just sort of a rubbing sensation. Very similar to that is going to be what's called iliotibial band syndrome, much more commonly referred to as IT band syndrome, or even more commonly referred to as runner's knee. Now, here's the thing. It's runner's knee or runner's hip, and they are basically the same thing. They're just taking place in a different spot. So your IT band, you can see we actually kind of drew it in white here because that's really what it looks like. We don't really, it is a muscle. It has contractile abilities for sure. But this is a muscle that tends to really get very overly active because it is mostly fascia. So you can see here, there's going to be different portions. This section here, that's your tensor fasciae latae, that's your TFL. And then it keeps running down and becomes your IT band. So if we look at like the TFL/IT band, here's a little bit of a different version, right? Again, the TFL runs down, and then look at all this fascia here, right? You can see like there's your gluteus medius, your gluteus minimus is also part of that. So what'll often happen is we'll see runner's hip or runner's knee. Runner's hip, often occurs right here on what's called the greater trochanter of the femur. So there we go. That's the picture I want. So you'll see this like knob that sticks out on the edge of your femur as it runs down. I didn't draw that here because it didn't, was only looking at the knee, but traveling all the way up to the hip, we see the IT band and the gluteus medius and the gluteus minimus all attach right here and then run down. And so if that trochanter is rubbing on the muscle, because maybe this IT band gets really tight, or if the TFL gets really tight, it's going to rub up here. That's runner's hip. Or it'll rub down here. If you look at the lateral aspect, you look at the lateral side of your femur here, you can see it definitely has these ridges on the outside. This one right here, that's your what's known as your lateral epicondyle. There's a medial epicondyle as well, and you can get a rubbing there. Sometimes it's pretty freaking rare, but it can happen. But there's the lateral epicondyle. That one, it rubs on the IT band, right? And so that rubbing sensation gets really hot and very inflamed over the day and becomes a real problem. So it's connective tissue, particularly your IT band fascia, rubbing there. And so that's the the iliotibial band, right? It's running from the ilium, which is this flare on the side of your pelvis here, down to your tibia. And so your IT band, big pain in the butt. And then lastly, we've got patellofemoral pain. So patellofemoral pain is pain in the front of the knee. This is caused by poor patellar tracking. Basically, your kneecap is not moving the way it's supposed to. And you may not have known that your kneecap has to move, but it does. It actually has to slide up the knee and then back down into place whenever you are bending your knee. So I do want to show you, just so you guys can actually see a good video of this, patellar motion. So this is actually how your kneecap is meant to move, right? You can see as we like flex the knee, you can see the patellar actually gets dragged upwards, just like that. Now, ideally, it should be moving. If you remember your knee, it's got those little dents in it, right? Ideally, it should be moving up that dent pretty easily, right? But what often happens instead, and you can see here, right? This is sort of what that looks like, right? See how it does a little bit of lateral movement? It needs to stay in that ridge. That's what your kneecap, this is like looking up someone's shin, right? And so it needs to travel up and sort of through that little ridge there. And then it comes back into place, right? So there we go. So it goes down and it goes up whenever you are moving the knee around, right? So if I extend my knee, right, my kneecap is you know, in a straightened position there, right? It's nice and low. But as I sort of come up, my kneecap has to roll and move through that whole position there. So if that doesn't move properly, remember you also got, if you look at our patella, if you look at your 3 quadriceps muscles plus your 4th one, you're going to see, you know, it's all kind of tied in there, right? You've got your Vastus Lateralis, that's the lateral quadricep muscle we're going to look at. Your Medialis, that's the medial one. The Intermedius, which you don't see here, it's underneath this big one. That's your Rectus Femoris, that's sort of the main quadricep. But there's the Intermedius that lives directly underneath this. You just can't see it in the picture because it's hidden. But 1, 2, 1, 2 is behind 3, and then the 4th one's over top. And then the whole thing runs. So if any of this is pulling a little bit too much medial or pulling a little bit too much lateral, right? Or maybe pulling a little bit superiorly, or maybe they're not pulling enough and so it's falling inferiorly. If any of that happens, you're going to get poor patellar tracking and it's not going to slide the way it's supposed to. And so the cartilage is going to get damaged over time because it's going to grind, right? Because if you look at your patella, you can see it's this is actually going to be a little bit hard to, I'll bet there's not great drawings of this. Yeah, no, it's not bad. You can see there's cartilage here, right? So there's sort of what that tendon net looks like, right? And there's a little cartilage there. Now, you might be thinking like, it's a little weird to have this friggin' bone here, right? Because it's not actually connected with any ligaments, right? Like that's all, like a tendon is just kind of holding that there. Well, this is why that's an example of what's called a sesamoid bone, right? Sesamoid bones are bones that are just sort of embedded within connective tissue. You've got some, you know, in your toes there, but probably the best example, right? These little ones right here. You know, they're floating bones that would fall off if we didn't have like our muscles and stuff and our connective tissue. But honestly, like your kneecap is such a good example of that because it's just embedded within this connective tissue there, you know? And so that's what holds it in place. So obviously, because muscles have contractile abilities, that's going to cause the kneecap to track irregularly if there's overactivity on one side of a muscle and not the other. So patellofemoral pain, very, 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 very common. Now, I do want to show you guys just a little bit of like why the patella is so important. I love this demonstration. Oop, that's not what I want. So I talk about this idea sometimes of what is called mechanical advantage. And basically what mechanical advantage is is it is where the shape of something is making it much, much more efficient. So by having a kneecap, you are able to increase force output in your quadriceps by a massive amount. So here's a little explanation that kind of shows you what we're talking about, right? So what we've got here is sort of an example of what our kneecap, sort of how our kneecap behaves, right? So he's got a rubber band tied down here, and it runs over top of this little rock that he's got here, and then he's got a rubber band. So the rubber band works just like a muscle. Your quadriceps, it pulls this way, and then that causes this kicking action, right? But now look what happens if he removes the rock. By decreasing that angle, he's decreasing mechanical advantage. So it would take a massive amount of force to be able to extend the knee without our kneecap. So again, it's taking it and it's just adding a little bit of that sort of first class lever action. There's a sort of an axis point, there's a pivot point like here in the middle. And so it's increasing the angle of that axis, which just massively increases mechanical advantage. So we're able to output a lot more force with a lot weaker of a contraction. So kneecap, very, very, very cool little bone there. Any questions on this anatomy so far, guys? Questions, comments, concerns? Checking in with y'all. How you feeling?
Good.
All righty. So let's take a look at, again, look at these bones here so we can get familiar with them. Again, you get your femur up top, you got your patella there in the center, your tibia, which is this, your main shin bone, and your fibula, right? So a couple different joints that we are talking about here. There's your tibiofemoral joint. That's the knee joint that we're kind of thinking of, right? It's where your femur meets up with your tibia. There's your patellofemoral joint, where your patella is sort of dealing with your femur, right? It's got to be able to do that slide. And then there is the tibiofibular joint, where your tibia is interacting with your fibula. And so like that is off to the side of your knee, right? You feel that little knob off to the side. That's the top of your fibula, where your tibia and fibula are sort of working with one another. We have to call it the superior tibiofibular joint because this bone meets twice. If you look at tibiofibular, they do meet twice. There's the superior version and the inferior version. So there's the superior one and there's the inferior one, or you could call it the proximal and distal ones because it's closer or further away. So there's our knee anatomy. Now there are some special structures here, like I said, right? You've got it is a synovial joint, just like most of the joints that we spend our time talking about. So it's got a cavity, right? It's got a joint cavity with synovial fluid in it in order to decrease friction. And so your synovial cavity is sort of filling up with that synovial fluid. It looks like egg whites. It's there to act as sort of like grease on the hinge here. The capsule of the knee, and so you can see all that space sort of in here, right? You've got your menisci, right, on either side. This is a lateral view of the knee, but we would see there's the lateral aspect, or there's the medial aspect. Those are your different meniscuses. And then you've got some fat pads in here as well. That's kind of a fun one. You've got fat in your knee. That's very essential. We need to have that fat there because it's decreasing the amount of friction and adding some cushion there. And then you've got a whole bunch of what are called bursae or bursa. And so a bursa is basically a little fluid-filled sac that is also there to sort of decrease the friction. Actually, this morning I grabbed this from downstairs from a little Amazon package that I got, right? And these are kind of like bursa. And they're there to kind of decrease the friction of the package as it was traveling to me. And I was waiting all day for this. But one of the problems, if your muscles get too tight or if your bones grind too much due to altered posture, what can happen is you can get what's called bursitis, which is where you rupture your bursa. And then all that fluid that's in there actually starts leaking out. And and now you are no longer decreasing friction, and so it will feel very much like tendonitis. Happens a lot in the shoulders, happens a lot in the knee. Those are two of the most common areas where we'll see those injuries. So all right, now let's talk about posture before we get into the muscles today. One of the things that we got to talk about is the resting posture of your knee joint. So we got to look at the relationship between our knee and our hip here. And this is where, like I said, we're going to start, kinesiology is kind of complicated to break down, because it's like the knee is affected by the ankle, is affected by the hip, is affected by the ankle, is affected by the knee, like it's just all weaved together. Your body is a big kinetic chain, right? But so we're mentioning a little bit of hip stuff here, but this is actually what your posture really should look like. When you take a look here, you can see there's your pelvis sitting neutral, and then there's this little bit of angle here that comes out, right? If you draw a line from what right here, this is called your ASIS, that's your anterior superior iliac spine. And we call it that because it's kind of like the spine, like our spine kind of is this ridge that sticks out on our back, right? Well, this is the ridge that sticks out on your pelvis. And it's the anterior part because it's here in the front, it's superior because it's actually above. There's another spine that would be down here, right? So anterior superior, iliac, this little flare right here on either side, those are called your ilium spine. So ASIS, nobody's going to freaking call it anything but the ASIS. So your ASIS is this knob. You can feel this, by the way, guys. If you sit up right now, if you go right here, feel how hard, I'm smacking that thing, right? And it's, there's just not a lot of tissue there other than bone, so I'm not too worried about it, right? But you can just hear, that's my ASIS. Now, that is where your TFL starts, by the way. It lives right here and then runs over to, there's another knob down here, right? This is my femur, right? It runs down the thigh. But remember that little greater trochanter, right? That little knob right here, that's what we're seeing, this ridge down here on the hip, right? Feel that, right? You really smack it pretty hard, right? So your TFL runs from your ASIS to your greater trochanter there. And that's one of the muscles we're actually going to look at today because it is a hip flexor. It kind of helps me with this. It's not the main hip flexor for sure, but it does do a little bit of that. It's also a knee internal rotator, a femoral internal rotator. But here's the thing, right? Those run right there. Now, if you draw a line from my ASIS, which is the knob right here, to the center of my patella, right? And then you draw another line that's just, a 90-degree line going straight up and down. If you measure the angle between those two right here, that should be 15 degrees or less in our male clients. And it should be about 20 degrees or less in female clients. So if we look up Q angle, that's what we should see. Now, do you have to measure that? Definitely not. No, nobody's expecting. I mean, you can, right? You can Mo's going to teach you guys how to use protractors, and you can actually measure your Q angle. But it's usually something that we're eyeballing, we're visualizing, right? So ideally, you'll see it's a little bit different. Women have a wider pelvis. That's why their angle is a little deeper, right? 20 degrees for them, 15 degrees for us. Now, what happens is that angle gets messed up. We end up with what's called knee valgus. Okay, knee valgus is an excessive Q angle. Okay, there's too much angle in the Q here, right? So what that looks like is it's the knees. That's very low quality. It's the knees caving in. There we go. So it's the knees caving in, right? So you can see this is a major Q angle, right? If we draw a line down like this, right? There's that 90-degree line here, but then we draw a line from here to the kneecap, right? See how it causes the hip to kind of flare out. That's a much wider Q angle. That is causing a gap on this side of the knee, and it's causing a grinding on this side of the knee. Whereas normally it should be sitting nice and level, right? So that's what we mean when we say Q angle. So again, women are going to have a much higher Q angle because their pelvis is wider than ours. I say ours, yes. Yeah, what's up, Danny?
Question
Yeah.
about that person, because I see a few people, they walk like, well, they posture. It's like, you know, when you work with horse, and so you
Oh,
know, it's like, so with that clients, we have to work first to fix that the knee angles, or
I mean,
what
if they have any
we
aches or
have to do
pains,
when
yeah.
we have a clients like with that problem.
Yeah, if they have aches and pains, yeah. If they're riding horses all the time, they're probably actually, they might be dealing with this one here, where their knees are
Uh-huh.
actually bowing out.
No, okay, but my question is, I was just giving an example, but what if we have a client, there is any, I think you mentioned before other day, it was like that poster was kind of like the virus poster, it was like a disease or something like that.
Oh,
No,
rickets.
okay, so but what we have to do when we get a client with that problem?
So rickets is really hard for that. Rickets is very much like a disease that we are not going to have a huge impact on. You can see it's here. It's usually associated with like poor nutrition at a very young age. And so what'll happen is the knees will, the bones will actually bend.
But it's safe to work with them?
Safe, yeah. You definitely have to make a lot of modifications. But see how like the bones are literally bending, right?
Okay.
That's what happens if there's like a low amount of calcium, or you'll see it in like a lot of like super northern European populations sometimes, because don't get any sun. And so like lack of sun exposure means that they're not getting enough vitamin D. Not enough vitamin D means they're not using their calcium properly. If they can't use calcium properly, their bones don't harden properly. So when they're developing at a young age, they'll get this. We can work with somebody like that, yes. To answer that question, yeah. If to say that we can fix their posture through, you know, if their bones harden as an adult into that sort of bent position, because that's the other thing. When you're a kid, you're mostly like, you're a lot of cartilage. And so the problems arise like as an adult when that stuff starts to harden. That is very much a medical condition that is sort of outside of our depth. If it's sort of like structural like that. Similar to, oh, I just remember, yeah, you weren't, yeah. It's similar to, okay, so there's two types of scoliosises, right? We call it a structural scoliosis, when you know, somebody's born with a curved spine, it happens. And then sometimes people will develop a scoliosis through bad habits and posture, and we call that a functional scoliosis. We can work with a functional scoliosis. We can get that to go away. We just pull, you know, put the stack back into alignment by loosening up the right muscles and tightening up the right muscles. But a structural scoliosis that you're sort of born with, that's a little bit harder for us to fix. We might be able to give them a little bit of relief. We can definitely still work with them, but we have to be aware of the fact that like we're probably going to have to make a lot of modifications in our workout. You know, let's say you got a client with rickets. I still think, yeah, absolutely, work with that client for sure. You know, but to give them the expectation that like you're going to relieve a lot of aches and pains and like, you know, fix this problem that they have, this biological, you know, that I wouldn't make that promise, you know. But they still get a lot of benefits. They're burning lots of calories, that, you know, which are going to help them maintain weight. They're increasing stamina, energy production. You know, there's still a lot to be gained through exercise. It's similar to working with patients who have like MS, multiple sclerosis. That's a nervous system autoimmune disease. Now, exercise has really big positive benefits for MS peripherally. It does not affect the disease at all. We can't do anything to fix MS. They're going to have neurological problems. They're going to have issues with their balance, right? But when they train, they learn how to catch their balance much more quickly. And so let's say like they lose their balance for a second and they start to fall. They're strong enough, fast enough, reactive enough to kind of catch their balance again. So we're definitely improving their life because we're, you know, we're making a difference between like falling all the way to the ground or losing your step for a second. You know what I mean? So if they have that disease, unfortunately, there's not a lot we can do. But I would say like there are definitely still benefits to be gained from, you know, exercise. Does that make sense?
Yeah, thank you.
Answer your question too. So a Q angle. Now this is in normal bones, right? This is in a normal like hardened bone. This is just poor posture, right? So we'll see either knee valgus, where the knees cave in, that's an increased Q angle, or sometimes we'll see knee varus, which is a decreased Q angle. And so if we look at like knee valgus, just to see like a little bit of a more passive version of this rather than just like a diagram, you can kind of see actually that's a little hard to see. It's not bad. I mean, you can definitely see here, right? That's somebody whose knees are caving in, you know, especially during like a squat. This is why knees caving in is one of our compensations we look for in the overhead squat, right? Oh, that's interesting. I wonder why. Huh. That's fascinating. This is, I don't know who this athlete is. Eddie, you know, I wonder if he's doing that on purpose or, you know, but you can definitely see, right? Yeah, there we go. Right there's that's a knee cave in posture. And you can see where it's starting is his ankle, right? His ankle's flattening in, right? So there's muscles at the ankle and at the hip that are probably affecting this knee cave in posture. So that knee valgus is very, very, very common, right? And it causes a lot of injuries, right? It's putting extra stress on certain parts of the knee. You talk about like tearing your meniscus, or, you know, getting an ACL injury while you're cutting on the field. Most of the time that is due to excessive knee valgus. You'll see injuries associated with knee varus, IT band syndrome, runner's knee instead of runner's hip in particular. Runner's hip usually is a knee valgus problem. Runner's knee is usually a knee varus problem. Both of those are a tight TFL, actually, by the way. Other knee varus ones. Remember earlier I said like MCL tears, that sometimes happens. That will sometimes happen with knee varus. But like I said, probably the most common knee injury is an ACL tear. And that is most commonly because we see a lot of knee valgus. Okay, so we see a lot of knees caving in. And we'll sometimes see knees caving out. It definitely will happen out there. We just don't see it as often. So excessive Q angle, you can see how that causes problems, right? Too much of a Q angle causes a grinding on the outside and a gaping on the inside. And so this ligament is in a shortened state. This ligament is in a lengthened state. You hit it even further, it's going to tear, you know? All right. So you guys ready to dive into the muscles? Any questions about sort of what that alignment should look like, what that ideal posture should be? If you want, by the way, if you do want to make sure that your knees are tracking properly, let's see here, knee to toe relation. I'll find a good picture of this. So actually, really quickly, I do want to take a look at this poor example here. So this is a really good diagram that kind of shows you knee valgus. So what's happening with knee valgus is sort of is three things simultaneously. We're seeing the foot flatten. We're seeing the foot like collapse down, right? So remember we talked about pronation yesterday, right? A little external rotation, a little bit of eversion of the foot. That eversion is causing an internal rotation of the tibia, right? It's rotating here. And then that's causing internal rotation of the femur because of the way the condyles sit. Remember, like you've got like little gaps in there. And so the femur sits into that. So when this flattens in, this rotates in, this rotates in, right? Now, here's what's very confusing. Ideally, this is our posture, right? See how the kneecap, if I drew, actually, you know, I got a computer. Let's see how well they drew this image. I'm going to copy this image. I'm going to take it over to Paint. We're going to draw a perfectly straight line straight down. I'm going to start in the center of the kneecap and go straight down. That's actually a little internal. The artist who drew this, it's actually a little bit internal. So the center of the kneecap is lining up with the first and second toe. Ideally, it should line up with the right between the second and third toe. So I would say that even this is a little bit of knee valgus. But look over here, right? It's literally lining up inches inside the thigh. So that's why this is their example for knee valgus. And this is actually supposed to be their ideal. It is. It's actually, this is really good. You know, if I got a client who looks like this, I'm stoked. But ideally, it should be, you know, sort of lined up kind of like that. But that's not straight, right? Remember, we're looking 90 degrees down. So really quickly, what is very confusing, guys? Remember, this is the anatomic position, right? Now, if you were to flatten this, if you were to unfold the femur by itself, like let's say you lift this person's leg off the ground, right? So I'm going to do this and kind of build this for you guys, right? Let me take this off screen share so you can see that better. So if I go here and I flatten my foot down, right? Do you notice how my knee instantly collapsed inwards? Right? I know it's kind of hard to see, but you see how like I'm not moving my knee on purpose. I'm just flattening my knee down. You see how my knee came inward, right? So now what's actually happening here, and this is how this is labeled. I know that this is drawn. Let me put this back. We draw this as an internal rotation. Right? It's moving towards the inside. It is collapsing inwards. Here's what's very confusing. That is actually tibial, so just the tibia by itself. That's tibial external rotation. Now you're like, now you might be looking at that, like this confused the crap out of me when I was in school. I was like, what do you mean that's external rotation? That's very clearly collapsing towards the inside. But if you were to restore posture to the femur, this would be even further outside. So if you can see my femur tracks in like this. Now, if I lift my leg up and I bend my knee, look at how this is actually pointing my foot that way. You see that there? This is tibial external rotation. It only happens at a bent knee. Stand up, if you're at home right now, stand up right now and just try with a straight leg from the knee down to rotate your foot outwards. You can't do it, it's impossible. What you can do is you can bend your knee and then you can swing it outwards, right? See how my foot, right, contracts like this? And if you put your hand on the back of your thigh right here, you'll actually feel the muscle contracting to do that. That muscle is known as your biceps femoris short head. I talk about it all the time. That muscle is an a-hole. It is a tight muscle on pretty much all of our clients. So what we're actually seeing in this knee valgus is we are seeing a femoral internal rotation, a tibial external rotation, and a foot flattening. So a lot of people draw this like this because it looks like that to the naked eye, but that's not actually what's happening in the joint mechanics. If we look at like knee valgus rotation, there we go. That's a much better picture. This person drew it correctly. So it is internal hip rotation, adduction as well, by the way, but that's a hip thing. So we'll talk about that on Monday. External tibial rotation, and then ankle pronation. We're seeing the E version there. And that's knee valgus, right? Let's take this person's hip, let's take a picture of this and move it over to paint here. Again, if I draw a straight line straight down from the center of her kneecap on both of these, it lands inside her foot, right? Ideally, this is another reason why we do our assessments barefoot, by the way. Ideally, that picture is so small. There we go. It should line up right here. Center of the kneecap, second and third toe. Not in, not out. Right? Oh, I totally just got turned around. Look at that. I said in and out. Sorry, not in. That's the big toe. Not internal, not external. This is knees caving out. This is knees caving in. This is ideal posture. So we need to know what muscles are causing all this problems, right? What muscle is causing this rotational movement to happen when it should be staying neutral? Well, here we go. Let's go through our list here. All right. So first muscle we are going to look at is the biceps femoris long head. This is we're going to do our hamstring complex first today, guys. So the biceps femoris muscle is a hamstring muscle, and it has two sets of fibers. This is the first muscle we're going to see that does this. It's a little complicated, but you've got basically 4 hamstring things to remember. Now, I know what you're thinking. You're like, doesn't sound like, there's no way I have 4 hamstring muscles. Technically, you don't. Technically, you got 3, right? You got the semimembranosus antenna, that's the medial hamstring. And then you get the lateral, which is the biceps femoris, but it has 2 heads. It has 2 sets of fibers. So because of that, we need to look at those separately because they do a little bit like, I mean, they work together. They are, the same muscle, but they are just slightly, they have slightly different functions because of their shape. So the first one's the biceps femoris long head, okay? You can see that here, right? Notice how it runs all the way from the back of the pelvis and it runs to the lateral aspect. So if you hear somebody say the lateral hamstring, which is way easier to say, that's your biceps femoris. And it's probably the long head if it's the one running all the way up to the thigh. So what does it do? What's its job? Well, when it's shortening, when it's concentrically contracting, it accelerates knee flexion. So its job is this: knee flexion, right? 180 degrees. I don't know, what was that? 45 degrees, right? So that's the angle goes down. That's flexion, right? It's a sagittal plane muscle, right? And so it does knee flexion there. Now, one thing that it also does, because it's attached at the knee, there's the flexion we're talking about, but it's also attached here at the hip. So it can pull from the hip all the way down to the fibula there. And what it can do is it can do hip extension. So it works as a hip muscle as well to do this. Now, is it great at it? Not really. My glute is my main hip extensor, but my hamstring muscles do help because they are attached there, right? So when I'm doing hip extension, right, my hamstring muscles will contract a little bit, but they're synergists. They're not supposed to do most of the work. They're not meant to be the prime mover. But let's say you have a client with low back rounding, the butt tuck posture, the scared dog, the old man butt, right? What is happening there in somebody who's got the butt tuck? You can kind of see it here, right? She's just got a flat back rather than having a neutral spine. We don't want an anterior pelvic tilt either, but this flat back posture, that's those hamstring muscles pulling down on the pelvis in the back, causing it to go from here to here. That's those hamstring muscles pulling in. So very much, that's instead of her glute working the way it's supposed to, right? The hamstrings are doing too much work, and that's what causes the tilt. So this synergist muscle is taking over for the agonist muscle. My hamstrings are doing work that my glutes are supposed to do. So that's the biceps femoris long head, right? It accelerates knee flexion, hip extension, and then one other thing that it does is it does tibial external rotation. So, like I said, if you guys stand up, place your hand on the lateral part of your thigh, so like right about here, and bend your knee. You'll feel the hamstring contract when you bend your knee, by the way, because obviously hamstring muscle. But if you go like this and rotate your foot away, you will feel that hamstring contract. So that muscle is in charge of this action here, going external, right? That's your biceps femoris long head. So that one's a little bit complicated. Now, obviously, the opposite of that is everything that we see go in the other direction, right? Antagonist muscles would, we're going to see this muscle relax when it does knee extension. So when your quads are working, it's going to relax. When you do hip flexion, it's going to relax. And when we do tibial internal rotation, it's going to relax. So what muscle does tibial internal rotation? Well, if you take a look, you can probably figure it out. These hamstring muscles that tie to the other side. So the external one rotates externally, right? That's the lateral one. And the internal one, the medial one, it rotates internally. So we'll see that in just a moment. So that's the biceps femoris long head. Now, the biceps femoris short head, take a look right here. It's basically the same muscle, right? Except that instead of running all the way to the top, it actually starts on the middle portion of your femur. This is why this is technically considered one muscle, because it kind of, I'm going to try to draw this and we'll see if this works, but it kind of works like this. You know, imagine the muscle like running up like that, right? But then as it's running, it has some extra fibers that just kind of branch off right here. And then the rest of it kind of continues on. So this is like your pelvis there, right? And then this is, you know, your knee. Oh God. Right? So that fiber would run up there, right? Oh God, no. Kneecap, knob, and it would run up, right? So see how this one actually, like, it grabs the middle of the bone, and then the rest of the fibers continue all the way up to the pelvis. So that's why it's technically its own muscle. It kind of acts like its own muscle. But there it is, right? It starts in the middle of the bone, runs the same spot, right? This one's all the way from the hip to the fibula, right? This one is just from the middle of the femur into the fibula. Now this one, because it doesn't attach to the hip, it doesn't do hip extension. So this one is in charge of knee flexion because it does attach at the knee. And it just does that tibial external rotation. Now, that tibial external rotation is what we're seeing here, right? The tibia is swinging this way. So honestly, I'm going to erase this, right? And we're going to draw this freaking arrow going this way because that's actually what's happening. Now, we observe, don't be wrong, we observe it, it looks like it's going inward. But remember, we got to go from the anatomic position. So it's not swinging inwards, it's swinging outwards, right? So that's when we see knee valgus. Right, that's, I'm gonna make this way bigger. Like we're seeing in this picture here, this is knee valgus, right? What is happening are these things simultaneously. We are seeing femoral, you know what, hold on. I'm just gonna, I just need the picture. We're seeing femoral internal rotation and adduction. So it's sorry. Whoop, sorry. We're seeing femoral internal rotation and adduction. And we are seeing tibial, so the tibia down here, external rotation. And we are seeing foot pronation. Oh my God, paint, you are killing me today. Right, and remember, pronation is eversion plus dorsiflexion plus external rotation. Right, so all those things coming together. So do not miss, there we go. So that's really what we're seeing in this picture here, right? We're seeing femoral internal rotation, tibial external rotation, and foot pronation. This is why, do you remember yesterday I was talking about like feet turn out, and I said one of the muscles that's listed on there is a hamstring muscle. It's the biceps femoris short head in particular, because the short head only does external rotation. It's the whole biceps femoris, but in particular, this short head fiber, man, guys, this muscle is overactive on everybody. When we see a client with runner's knee, right? It's the biceps femoris. It's contracting, so it's rubbing on the outside. It shares fascia with the IT band. So this muscle just gets really, really tight. It is always on our overactive muscles. Not always, but it is just so common. It just shows up on a bunch of overactive muscles list. So how do you stretch this freaking thing, right? Well, again, it eccentrically decelerates knee extension. So by extending the knee, you're going to stretch your biceps femoris, right? So boom, there I go. I've got my knee extended, right? That's stretching out my biceps femoris. Now, it also does external rotation. So if I let my foot like hang out like this, right? If I go at this angle and I just let my foot turn this way, that's not stretching my biceps femoris short head. What I need to do is I need to keep it neutral, and I need to make sure I'm not rotating my pelvis, because guess what? It's external again, right? How many times do you guys see people do that hamstring stretch where they go like this? Same side, like right leg, right arm. That opens my pelvis this way. I need to take my pelvis this way, right? So what I'm going to do, use my chair here, is I'm going to sync them up, right? I'm going to take my leg up. I'm going to bring my hands together, and I'm actually going to bring my hands across my body. Try this stretch right now, guys. You'll feel it right back here behind the back of your knee and the back of your thigh on the lateral aspect of your hamstring. Because what that does is that rotates my pelvis. If I can get my pelvis facing this way, I'm basically bringing the thigh across my midline. And so I'm adducting it instead of abducting it, which is what the muscle wants to do. So I'm stretching it. So biceps femoris stretch. Again, everybody needs this freaking thing. Is going to look like this. She could do this one. She's laying down. See how it goes across her body. She's in, knee extension, which is stretching the hamstring. She's also going internal instead of external. She's going across her body, right? Another good one, aside from that, would be the standing version. One I was just doing, that one there. She goes across her body. Try this stretch, guys. I really encourage you. See how she's pointing her toe this way, right? Because it wants to externally rotate. So she's going into her body. She's going internal rotation. That's how she stretches it. Any questions on that one? I know I don't normally, I want to get through the whole hamstring, but like I want to stop on this one in particular because so many people need this. Remember how many people we saw feet turn out, knees cave in at the gym, right? We saw like so many people do it. This muscle right here. Do you guys understand how to stretch that? Checking in with y'all?
Yeah.
Try it out. Actually, yeah.
All right.
And George in particular, give it a shot, because I remember we get the heels raised, get that soleus stretched out, but then also try this one. I'll bet you'll instant relief. And when I say instant relief, I mean when the stretch is done.
All right. I'll check it out.
Not fun to stretch. Fair warning. All right. Our other two hamstring muscles. This is the meaty part of your hamstring, but it's also the meaty part of your hamstring. Not to get too punny with you guys, but this is the you see your hamstring. You see the big meaty part of it. Oftentimes, I feel like Arnold. He was like the guy. Like Arnold Schwarzenegger had like freaking hamstrings for days. Absolutely crazy. But just a lot on that inside portion. That's your medial hamstring that we're seeing there. The medial parts inside. This is their names, because there's two fibers here, are your semimembranosus and your semitendinosus. There's a very slight difference, but they do exactly the same thing, so it really doesn't matter. But sometimes they'll say like your semimembranosus and semitendinosus. They'll put them together. So it's just your medial hamstrings. They're both on the inside. Here's the membranosus. Take a look. Here's your tendinosus. Same exact freaking place, right? The only difference is like one of them, and honestly, NASM's not even drawing them that great. The only difference is the membranosus starts up here. The tendinosus is a little bit lower down. That's it. They both run to the same spot. So what do? Look at my slides. Look at the definition. Not even changing, right? They both accelerate knee flexion and hip extension, and then they do tibial internal rotation. So in the same way that your femoris rotated externally, this one rotates internally. So knee flexion, hip extension, and internal rotation instead of external rotation. It goes this way instead of that way, right? And you'll feel it. Put your hand on the back of your hamstring. You'll feel the outside fibers contract to rotate your foot to the outside. You'll feel your inside fibers contract to rotate you towards the inside. So those are all the hamstrings, and yeah, they can get tight sometimes. But notice how they all did hip extension, right? So they are a big part. You know, when you look at like a deadlift, the reason you're working your hamstrings during a deadlift, right? Look what's happening. You've probably got a little bit of a slight bend in the knees. So his knees go from flexed down here to straight. That's not the hamstrings, right? That's the opposite of the hamstrings. So why the heck does a deadlift work our hamstrings? Well, look at his hips. He's going from a hip flexed position to a hip extended position. So they're working during the hip extension. That's why your hamstrings work. And then you look at like a hamstring curl. Yeah, obviously this is very much, you know, that's knee flexion. So that works all of the hamstrings, right? All of them are in charge of knee flexion. But notice what she's doing in this picture. This is what so many people do. Again, so many clients, so many clients have feet turnout, right? And it's because of an overactive biceps femoris short head. It's hard to see because it's a GIF. I can't slow it down. Do you guys see? Look at the angle of her feet. She's curling, but she's curling with her feet like this. Her feet aren't neutral. So what hamstring muscle is she mostly working? Her biceps femoris. Probably the short head, but just biceps femoris and John. They both do external rotation. So if I was training her, I'd be like, hey, I need you to keep your feet straight. Or we're going to do half our reps this way. I'm going to need you to go back and do the other half the other way, right? This is why we want a neutral position. So many clients will do their hamstring curls improperly, or they'll do floor bridges like this. Oh, that's actually a hamstring curl. That's cool. I thought this was a picture of a bridge. That's a hamstring slide. This is a great freaking exercise, by the way. And she's doing a good job. I thought she was going to rotate her feet away too. You see that a lot. That guy's kind of doing it. This is a rehab exercise. You can tell he's on an unstable environment there, but see his foot's turning away, right? So a lot of people are going to have that lazy foot because they're like, oh, I'm working my hamstring. It doesn't matter what I do with my ankle. It absolutely matters what you're doing at your ankle, right? If you want your whole hamstring, you need your toes pointed neutral. If you want the inside hamstring, you kind of need to point them pigeon-toed a little bit. And then if you want that outside, which don't do it, you get the Fred Flintstone posture. All right, let's look at the quads here. And then all we got left are stabilizers after that. So quadriceps, there's 4 of them. Shocker, I know. Right? Again, we've got the inside one, we got the outside one, we got the in the middle one, and we got the big one that lays over top of the whole thing. So we're going to start with the outside one. This is your Vastus Lateralis. This is the lateral quadricep muscle. Okay. It concentrically, when it's shortening, accelerates knee extension. So it kicks the thigh. It kicks the thigh forward, right? Knee extension. You know, by the way, the Vastus Lateralis, Let's see if I can find a picture of this. Training montage, knee extensions. You remember, I always think of Ivan Drago. Whenever I think of like quadriceps, I always think of Rocky IV. Where is it? I love this training montage. Come on, where's the I must have skipped right past it in the video. I'm gonna get my video flagged on YouTube. There it is, right here. Just crazy freaking quad muscles, you know, doing that leg extension. But there it is, right? There's this outside fibers contracting like crazy. That's kind of the thing, by the way, about the leg extension machine. It works it's supposed to work all the quads, but again, so many clients let their feet turn outward. So then they only end up using the lateralis. Remember, this is on the lateral side, directly opposite the biceps femoris short head. So again, feet turn out. That's this quad muscle here. So a lot of times we have a very overactive vastus lateralis that causes the knee to the kneecap to grind on the lateral edge. Which that poor patellar tracking, that patellofemoral pain. This is that when you hear somebody who has like crunchy knees, it's often a really tight outside quad muscle. So NASM's not getting too specific here, but they're just going to list it as concentrically accelerates knee extension, and they're right. You know, that's mostly what it does. Flip to the other side of the quad. There's your vastus medialis oblique. It has a special little O at the end there. It's the, you know, you get your vastus lateralis, you got your vastus medialis, but it's the vastus medialis oblique. And that's because these fibers actually run at an angle. So they're kind of, an oblique means angle, right? So just kind of runs at a kind of a funky angle. Like it's like, and then hooks back in, right? So that's the VMO. That's what we call that muscle. So a lot of times in the quadriceps, this is the one we want to strengthen. By the way, it also looks the best. It's the teardrop muscle. Not to brag, because I am by no means a bodybuilder, but the one thing that I have developed pretty well is the VMO, right? So you can see here, it's that inner fiber here rather than that lateral fiber here, right? So this is the teardrop muscle, right? That you always see on the inside portion of the quad. That is one that you really do want to develop. It'll keep your knee in alignment. And I'll say, like, the one type of injury that really has never gotten me too bad, other than when I got smacked and tore my LCL, is your knee problems. Knee problems are, you want to bulletproof your knees, you know? So knee extension is great, but the VMO, again, toes slightly pointed inwards, you're going to get a much better contraction out of that. Then we've got our vastus intermedius. That's the one that's in the middle. So if you think about like lateralis, medialis, intermedius is in between the two. Again, concentrically accelerates knee extension. So all three of these quadricep muscles here, look at the definitions, guys. Look at my slides. The text doesn't change at all. The only thing that changes is the picture. Right? So they all knee extension. They all do knee extension. Those are the three quad muscles that are just quad muscles. Now, looking at the hip here, right? We've got to take a look at one that is a knee muscle and a hip muscle. Again, we're not going to get any perfect examples. So we're going to see this muscle again show up on Monday. But the rectus femoris, this is your primary knee extensor, and it is also a hip flexor. So notice how all of these muscles, remember how we saw the three vasti muscles, the vastus muscles, they all start on the femur, greater trochanter to the kneecap, inside fossa to the kneecap, inside tubercle to the kneecap, right? So they all go like boop, kneecap, 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 right? And they all start on the femur right here. But take a look at your rectus femoris. The femur is here. This starts at your ASIS. So the rectus femoris, got a much better picture here on Ken Hub, if I can get it. It's showing them all. I want it by itself. All right, whatever. So it's actually not, I guess, your ASIS, but it is on the ilium there, right? So we see this is starting on the pelvis instead of on just the femur, right? Those three quad muscles start here. This one starts at the hip. So because of that, your rectus femoris is definitely your main knee extender, right? But it is also a hip flexor. So it also does this. So it brings my hip up as well as extends my knee. So concentrically, when it's shortening, it accelerates knee extension and hip flexion. So this muscle is working directly opposite of those hamstring muscles, like really directly opposite, because your hamstrings did knee flexion, but they also did hip extension. This one is hip flexion, the opposite of extension, and knee extension, opposite of knee flexion. Again, guys, I know it gets a little confusing sometimes because we're just like this way, that way, this way, that way, but it's all agonist-antagonist relationships, right? Any questions on those four quad muscles? Anybody feel good about the quads? Seem to be. All right, we only got a couple more. Let's take a look at two more hip muscles that are mostly knee stabilizers. So first one we've got is what's called our gracilis. Your gracilis is on the inside portion of your pelvis here, and it runs down and stabilizes the inner portion of the knee. So this is a hip adductor. You can see it's on the inside, so it's going to pull the knees adducted, right? So it accelerates hip adduction. It also does a little bit of hip flexion, just a little bit. It's not great at it, but it can do a little bit of hip flexion and drive the hip upwards. And it does a little bit of like hip internal rotation. So it can actually like rotate your femur inward hip. So, you know, there. But the big thing is that it assists in tibial internal rotation. So it also runs down here to the tibia. And again, if your feet are turned out, which is tibial external rotation, this will help turn them back in, which is tibial internal rotation. So that's your gracilis. Now, the integrative function is obviously all the opposite of that, but it stabilizes the lumbopelvic hip complex and the knee. That's really what your gracilis is here for. It's really there to stabilize the knee. So how are we going to work this muscle if mostly what it does is stabilization? Well, we're going to do a lot of single leg exercises. Single leg Romanian deadlifts, Bulgarian split squats, step ups to balance, lunges to balance. I go to my upper body, single leg this, single leg that, single leg this, single leg that, right? All of that stabilizing stuff that makes me use my knee. Or maybe I stand on like a piece of equipment, right? Bosu. Right, so maybe I do like a squat on a Bosu ball. Maybe I don't pull up a very simple GIF. There we go. Right? See how she's wobbling? Her gracilis is working to stabilize that whole time. Right? Knees caving a little bit, but not bad. Right? That's great. That's great. So that's a knee stabilizer that we definitely want to get familiar with. That's going to be on a lot of our lists. When people's feet are turning out, it's oftentimes because they're not stabilizing properly. And then our last muscle of the day, the sartorius. So our sartorius, also a hip flexor. This is the long, by the way, fun fact, longest muscle in your body. I can't remember what does sartorius mean? I know that, but Taylor. It's often called the Taylor's muscle. That's right. So yeah, it's this freaking big long muscle. It really is like, it's just like a big long whip, you know. And it runs all the way from here to the inside. So it crosses. It starts on the outside of your hip, runs across, and comes to the inside of your knee. And that's why it's a hip flexor. So it accelerates hip flexion. but it also does hip external rotation, so it can rotate your femur externally. And then it is hip abduction as well. If this pulls, it will sometimes pull your thigh outwards into abduction. For the knee, though, it does a little bit of knee flexion, believe it or not, which seems kind of weird. So oddly, it is working kind of like a hamstring muscle, weirdly enough. And then it does knee internal rotation. So again, rather than letting your toe externally rotate to get the toe, you can strengthen your sartorius and bring you back. So again, strengthening the gracilis and the sartorius, we want to train for alignment. We want to make sure our toes are pointing forward rather than letting that external rotation happen. And here's the thing, guys. If you do, like I like when I'm barbell squatting, I like a bit of external rotation during my barbell squat. I do, right? Like this is Aaron Horschig. I think this guy is the king of squats. See how his femur is pointing? He's got external rotation. But if you look at the knee angle tracking with his toes, it's perfectly over his second and third toe. You can have a foot turn out. You can have your knees turn out. They just have to stay in alignment. The problem that we generally tend to see is people who do this. Look, his foot angle is the same in both pictures. It's rotating out, but the difference is his knees are tracking over his toes here, which means if you unfold everything, it's all perfectly in alignment. Whereas this version, right, his knee is coming in here instead of over his toe. That's the difference. This is not alignment. This is alignment. Okay. So a lot of times, again, that's stabilizing muscles. We need that sartorius. We need that gracilis. Okay, that is the end of our muscles list. Are you guys, how's everybody feel about those muscles? You feeling all right?
Yeah, feeling pretty good.
Okay.
Yep.
Cool. All right, let's look at our movements, and then we'll look at what muscles do those movements. So we're just going to reverse it here. So we got knee flexion. It's bringing your heel towards your butt. You got knee extension. That's kicking your heel away from your butt, right? It's kicking a soccer ball as extension. Curling the leg is flexion. And then the other two movements, we've got tibial external rotation. So that's knee external rotation. That's this one. Biceps femoris, short head and long head, right? And then we got knee internal rotation. That is going to be gracilis, sartorius, and the two hamstring muscles, semimembranosus and semitendinosus. So here we go. The knee extension, vastus, 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 right? The three vastus muscles, right? Vastus lateralis on the outside, vastus medialis on the inside, vastus intermedius in the middle, and rectus femoris is the other knee extensor. That's the big one all the way from the hip coming down, right? So they're all quadriceps. That's the quad group, right? 1, 2, 3, 4. Knee flexion, there's technically 3, but really 4 things to memorize. Very confusing. Semimembranosus, semimembranosus, semitendinosus, those are the two medial hamstring muscles, right? Coming to the inside, right? And again, this picture does a little better job. See how they come to the same spot, but this one starts a little lower than this one. That's literally the only difference between the two. So medial hamstring here on this side. And then lateral hamstring, that's the biceps femoris, long head all the way from the hip to the outside, and then short head from just the femur to the outside. So this muscle splits, some of it inserts here, some of it inserts here, or originates, I should say. So that's long head and short head. Then we got the internal rotation. Remember, that's pulling the toes, inward, or most of the time like neutral. That is going to be your semimembranosus and your semitendinosus. It is also, they didn't list it here, but it's also your gracilis and sartorius. Those are also going to help with that. And then one muscle that NASM doesn't talk about, but it's here in this PowerPoint. It's called your popliteus. It's a knee stabilizer. It's a little tiny short muscle. You've got a what's called your Antagonist in your elbow, by the way. It looks exactly the same. Yeah, don't worry about it, but it's a little knee stabilizer. It works with the sartorius and gracilis. So how do you work it? Stabilize, right? How you get on a wobbly ball, right? This is horribly dangerous. Don't do this. But you want to work your knee stabilizers, get into an unstable environment. Stand on one leg on something wobbly, like a rolly chair. Don't do that. Horrible advice. But no, seriously, stand on one leg on a Bosu ball, on an RX pad, on a Dynadisc, something wobbly. That'll work those knee stabilizers. You get a little popliteus, gracilis, sartorius, and make sure you're not doing it with your foot turned out. Keep your foot in alignment. And then lastly, external rotation, this devil's movement that so many people have way too much of. The feet turn out, the knees cave in, right? The knees caving in because the feet is turning out, right? Remember I told you those two are tied together. Biceps femoris, particularly the short head, but really just biceps femoris in general. All right, so hopefully that made it a little bit clearer as to why, why we see some of those postural distortions we were looking at when we were meeting up in person. Any questions or questions on aches or pains? Like, starting to see that all tied together?
I understand. That's going good.
Love that. All right, fellas, guys, it's Friday. It's kinesiology. You need a Saturday. You need a Sunday. Let your brains cool down. Get some air in there. Go out and get some sun this weekend. Try to stay cool. I will say homework number 3 is up today. It's day 8. So please knock out homework 3 at some point over the weekend. If you haven't had a chance to do your other homeworks, it's a great time to catch up. But get some iced tea, relax. John, I know you're, doing something fun tonight. But yeah,
I'm gonna go to the beach right after this.
There we go. Cool the brain down, guys. Kinesiology, it gets a little like, it's my class, but look, it gets a little monotonous. I get it. It's a lot of lists. So give yourself some time to relax this weekend. And I'll see you guys on Monday for the hip stuff. The hip stuff is, it's, talking about squats. Everybody's favorite,
All right, man.
Right,
Sounds good. All right, bro. All right,
Peace out. Have a
everyone.
good
Have a
weekend.
good weekend.
Bye.
Bye, guys. I'll see you Monday.
right.
All right.